Hello QEP instructors. This is the second video on rubrics. In the first one, we defined a rubric by saying that it itself was a definition of good writing in a particular context. And we went over the Writing Matters rubric and said that it fit that definition of rubric because it is a community-wide articulation of local values. In other words, as a university, we got together over several years and over several meetings and focus groups, etc., and said, this is what our definition of good writing is here. And so as QEP instructors, you have two obligations. One is because of Faculty Outcome 2, you share it with your students. And the second, because of Faculty Outcome 3, you use it in assessing process writing done in your Writing Enhanced class. But the problem with that comes in that the rubric is too general and comprehensive to be used in any particular classroom for any particular assignment. It meets this definition about being particular because it applies to a particular place. But in order to make it meet this definition other than place, you've got to tailor the Writing Matters rubric to fit your assignment, your classroom, and your discipline. So how do you do that? There are three ways that I can think of, and here they are in descending order. The first is, every time you use the rubric, you change the 4 performance levels. Remember, we call them well below proficiency, proficient, and well above proficiency. And we define them generally. But every time you use the rubric, you should take the flavor or the meaning of those general definitions, but make them specific to your assignment. And we're going to go over some examples of that. A second way is that each time you use the rubric, you don't have to use all 6 of the categories, or the criteria, excuse me. I want to call those criteria. You may, on the first go round, the first draft, you may just want to look at organization and supporting claims. The second draft, you may want to look at all 3 of these: organization, supporting claims, and evidence. And it may not be till the very final draft that you look at the whole, whether or not the student used the whole recursive process or some kind of writing mechanics evaluation. And then the last way to modify it is that you don't have to use all 4 levels of those performance levels every single time. There may be times when just proficient and not proficient are enough to suit your purpose. So here's the first criterion. It's about the text being logically and coherently structured. And this is the general way that the QEP defines it. And we have called this, in a kind of shorthand among ourselves, organization and development. And as a general definition of organization and development, this is good. But it's going to be more helpful to you in your class if you don't use those general definitions. So to use the example of a lab report again, in this case, a lab report doesn't have a thesis statement. It does have a purpose, and it does have a required number of sections, and those sections are supposed to be in a specific order. So if you were doing the rubric for a lab report, your definition of proficient could say this: the lab report includes all required sections, and these sections are in the right order. You're still using criterion 1 of the Writing Matters rubric, but you're just making it specific to your assignment here. And then you would go on to say what below proficient is, what well below proficient is, and what well above proficient is. Unless you decided that well above proficiency and well below proficiency don't really have anything to do with the lab report. In that, your rubric would look like this. It would only have 2 categories: below proficient and proficient. It either has all those sections and they're in the right order or not. If this were your rubric for your lab report and that's what you wanted to look at in your class, this would be fine for this criterion. Here's the second criterion. It's about arguments being warranted and persuasive. In our kind of shorthand, I think we've called this supporting claims. Oops. And here's the general definition of whether this criterion is met. But again, you're going to want to change the rubric to keep the overall meaning of the category, but make it specific to your assignment. So in my case here, an assignment that I had, what I told students they needed to do was have 4 supporting arguments that backed up their thesis statement, and each supporting argument should be made separately in at least 1 paragraph. That's my definition of proficient in this example. And then I go in to fill in well above proficiency, where I say, in addition to proficient, the writer describes and respectfully and adequately refutes at least 2 counter-arguments. So that's asking the student to go above and beyond to get to be well above proficient. I would also go on to define for my students what below proficient is and what well below proficiency is. Here's the general description of proficiency and the other categories for the third criterion, evidence from reliable sources. And here's a definition of proficient for a specific assignment that I had in an English education class, where I wanted them to have evidence from reliable sources, but I defined what those sources would be. At least 5 credible sources, which we would have talked about in class, and at least 2 of them from peer-reviewed journals in English education. Even the criterion about using a recursive process can be made more specific. Here is the general definition of the 4 categories, but in my particular class, I may have told them already, I want at least 3 pages of planning. I want at least 2 drafts, and there better be a significant revision between the 2. I want at least 1 visit to the Writing Center, and I want at least 1 peer review group. So see, what I've done is I've taken this general definition, but I've put in my rubric specifically what I expect from my students. Now this criterion is the one where you have to do the most defining, because it's the one that says, these are the genres that my discipline uses, these are the audiences that my discipline speaks to, and then these are the conventions of my discipline. For example, a genre in a research paper in psychology, for example, follows different formats, different rules, has different parts to it, and uses a different kind of language than a research paper for an English journal might do. It's here that you define that for your students in this section. And here are some examples. For an English paper, I might put here as one part of what proficient is, that it uses MLA format. For a psychology paper, we might say it includes an abstract and a literature review. For a business class, we might say it follows the format of a business letter. And for an education class, this might say it uses the appropriate tone for addressing the school principal and parents. This would be if the assignment was to write a letter to the principal and parents explaining a student's progress. The last one is about writing mechanics, syntax, grammar, punctuation, sentence structure, all of that, formatting. This is a hard one anyway, and it'll be more effective if you tailor it down to the specific things that you've identified in your class that you want your students to work on. So for example, let's say that you've really focused in your class on writing sentences that have subject error agreement, no errors in subject verb agreement. Well, that might be the only thing you decide to grade on as far as this category goes on that one assignment. If that's the case, then that would be how you define proficient in this category. Or you might do two things. It might be contains no more than one error in subject verb agreement and contains no more than one sentence fragment. The idea is to pare this down so that it's manageable, so that you're able to assess it and make it clear to your students what it is they're supposed to do. So that's it for this video on how to modify the Writing Matters rubric to fit your individual assignment.